Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And first of all, Yishar Koach to everyone in the Torah service today, because they're holding Torahs for a really long time. And only once in my life did someone hand me a Torah scroll. And I felt so honored, and then I panicked because it's heavy. And you really don't, we look at it all the time, but it's quite heavy. So thank you to everyone who did our Torah service today. There is a very famous Jewish story connected to the Baal Shem Tov. And it's the Baal Shem Tov walking in to conduct services on Yom Kippur. He's very troubled, and he's not really communicating why he's troubled, but everybody's noticing he's very troubled. And the shul is filling and filling and filling, and the prayers are going and going and going, and he's still very troubled. And then, with no one noticing anything, in the back enters a young boy. And the young boy stands there and then whistles. The whole shul goes silent because it's so disrespectful. And the Baal Shem Tov stops, takes a breath, and says, "Now we can begin." Everything about the service changed in that moment. So, of course, the question is, who's the boy and what's the whistle? And as the story continues, the boy, found out later, was an orphan Jewish boy whose parents died when he was really very young. And he was raised by the man who owned the land they were living on. And the man who owned the land was not Jewish, but he raised the boy the best he could, and gave the boy the one article that the parents had left behind that was for the boy, and it was his mother's siddur. But neither the landowner nor the boy could read Hebrew and couldn't access anything about what was in there, and certainly the landowner had no idea about what being Jewish was like. And so it just immediately, the boy grew up and entered his adolescence and had no idea of what was going on. And then one day, he's walking into the marketplace, and he always carried the siddur of his mother with him, and he notices a whole group of people are going somewhere, and so he follows them, and lo and behold, they're going to the Baal Shem Tov shul. And he walks into the shul of the Baal Shem Tov and stands there and listens, and old memories trigger. And he reaches for his mother's siddur, and he holds it close, and he remembers a melody from long, long ago when he was little. But he doesn't have the language, and he doesn't have the words, and he can't read anything, but he wants to join his voice. So he whistles. And when the Baal Shem Tov was asked about it, it was not just what that whistle was, it was what was wrong with the first half, what was going on. And the Baal Shem Tov said, well, he could feel that there was so much going on in people's lives, so much going on in the world, so much going on at that moment, that everyone was praying and no one had authentic intent. It wasn't there. And he felt that all the prayers were getting together and clogging the gates of prayer. Nothing could get through, and he was very troubled by it. But when he heard the whistle and he turned around and saw the boy, he said, that's the whistle that pierced. It pierced everything, the authenticity and what came from the heart in that moment. And that whistle opened, pierced through, and all the prayers could now enter. I want us to keep that story in mind. And I want to talk about the last few days and what's been going on. So for anyone who doesn't know, my husband Vadim is from Russia. I want to be very careful about my language, because I learned very early when we were dating, from Russia doesn't mean he's Russian. I was corrected on that one many, many times, and not just by him, by anyone in his family or in his community. Very clear understanding. From Russia does not mean you're Russian. And when I said, then what are you? The answer was, we're Jewish. And I thought about that because it's true, but I couldn't quite figure out how they were expressing their identity. What was wrong by saying Russian? If you're born in Russia, you're Russian. Except no, they're not. We view Russia geographically. We view it as a country that has borders. It's a geography, the same way we view any other country. So if you're born there, you are that thing. But that's not how Russians view it. Russians view it as nationality. It's the nation you're with. It's not geography. So when you say to someone, well, you're born in Russia, so you're Russian, the answer would be, no, I'm not Russian, I'm Jewish. Because they're thinking nationality, we're thinking geography. And immediately there's a disconnect. And it actually goes even beyond that, because if I would say, Vadim is born in Russia, Vadim is from Russia, thinking, I got it. No, I'd be corrected again. He's not from Russia. He wasn't born in Russia. He was born in the former Soviet Union. That's correctly how you would say that my husband was born in the former Soviet Union. And I'm again thinking, I don't, and it's not that these are little things, these are huge things. This is how people from there, absolutely without exception, want the language to talk that way. And the idea is, again, we view Russia as geography. So if you're born in those borders, you're from Russia and you're born in Russia. But that's not how Russians view it. They view the label as a political identifier. It's the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, or present-day Russia. We don't talk like that because we don't think like that. The labels mean something very different to us than it means to them. And when the Iron Curtain was there, it blocked our view. We could not see past it. We couldn't hear. How do the countries behind it view themselves? How do they perceive the definitions of who they are and where they come from? How do they perceive their identities? It's country, it's nationality, and it's government. And they're very clear and very strict about it. Those lines should not cross. And to us, we don't even see those lines, let alone cross those lines. Try telling someone from Eastern Europe that any country that ends in stan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, any country that ends in stan, and if you say, oh yeah, that's part of Russia, watch what happens. Immediately, the answer will be, no, it's not. And again, we're struggling with understanding all these countries. How do we view them and how do they view themselves? Many Ukrainians speak Russian, many Russians speak Ukrainian. And it means something to them. There's a joke that's been circulating through Odessa the last few days, that two Jews stand in Odessa speaking Yiddish to each other in the city, a language that isn't often heard in the streets of Odessa. Another Jew walks by and hears the Yiddish and comes over and says, what are you guys doing? Why are you speaking Yiddish? And the answer is, we're afraid to speak Russian. We're worried Putin will hear us and he'll want to come liberate us. Language matters to them. It has meaning. They're choosing which language they're going to speak in because they speak many of them. And it's meaningful in the moment. Which language are they reaching for? And honestly, God help you if you call a Ukrainian a Russian or a Russian a Ukrainian. It is not a slip of tongue. It is hugely offensive. It is deeply hurtful. And we often mix it up because we don't understand how they're viewing things and how they're identifying, and even what a language could mean in a short exchange on the street. We don't understand the nuances of that side of the world. So, Vadim and I have been disagreeing through the week. We've been watching the news, even last week. This has gone on a couple weeks. I'm listening to the news and I'm saying he's going to invade. And Vadim's listening to the news and saying, no, he won't. And we're standing there, and again, this kind of, I don't see it how you're seeing it. And Vadim saying, I don't see it how you're seeing it. And when Vadim is in touch with friends that are still in Russia, they're all saying, he's not going to invade, and I don't understand. And we're looking at the same thing, and we're not able to reach the same view on it. And for anyone who doesn't know, Vadim is an expert in history. So it's not like history didn't inform the moment. He's an expert. So I had to sit there and think, well, what is it? How are we not on the same page? And then I realized, the former Soviet Union. Vadim was educated in the USSR. I was not. So while he is an expert of history, he is not an expert of Jewish history. And that's where the difference lay. He couldn't see it and I could see nothing but. Here's what we know. We as Jews know about Purim, and we as Jews know about Egypt, and we as Jews know about empires. We've actually been in the middle of them. We've been in between them. We've been in the midst of them. We've been attacked by them. We've been the sort of default to go to when they couldn't reach their enemies. We know empires. We know it through Jewish history. We recognize it when we hear it. So if we look at Purim and we say, the very first verse of the Megillah says, Vayihi bimei Achashverosh, and it was in the days of Achashverosh. Hu Achashverosh hamolich mehodu vad Kush. He's the Achashverosh who actually reigns from Hodu to Kush, 127 countries. 127 countries. The very first line of the Megillah told us, this is an empire. And everything you're about to read is about what goes on in an empire. And we got it. We saw what goes on. We heard the message. The Persian Empire is the one we're dealing with in Purim, but it's not different than any other one. Number one, the rulers of empires do not see people. They're blind to them. They're blind to the individual person. They don't see them. They don't hear them. Time and again, it simply exists when you have an empire. Secondly, an empire will reshape the narrative to fit its purpose. Everything must fit the purpose of the empire. We watched Haman do it. Haman turned to Ahasuerus and said, you know there's a people that lives among us. You got to watch out for them. They're enemies. They're internal enemies. Based on nothing except the need to reshape the narrative. And we got caught in the middle. Empires must have war campaigns. They can't exist if they don't have war campaigns. Nothing else accomplishes what the empire wants to accomplish. It has to be war. And when we look in the Torah, and the Torah tells us of the things you're allowed to do and the things you're not allowed to do, when you get a king, you are not allowed to go down to Egypt and get Arabian horses. Really? That's what we have to worry about, is that we can't go to Egypt and get a horse? Except when you have a king, and a king has Arabian horses, those are the best horses. They're going to need the best chariots, and when you have chariots and horses, you need drivers, you need trained drivers. Now you're going to have chariots, horses, military men. You're building an army, and armies don't sit still. If they sit still, they deteriorate. You need war. That's how you build an empire. So the Torah shuts it, says you will never build an empire. You're not even going to get the horses. You're not going to start. Empires need warfare. And when we look at the motive, that one we learn from Egypt immediately. When we left, Pharaoh told us to leave. We get to the Red Sea, suddenly he's chasing us. And we're thinking, what? You're the one who told us to leave. What is this, a surprise to you we left? Except there's one little phrase in there, and it says, Pharaoh heard the people had fled. We didn't flee. He told us to leave. What he's hearing is the legacy that will be left behind. He's hearing what people are saying. People are saying, oh, did you hear? The slaves fled. They ran away. They slipped through his fingers. And Pharaoh now hears how history will write him. He gets his army and he chases us. It's not he didn't know we left, and it's not he didn't agree we would leave. He was worried about his legacy and how history will record his reign. So he chases us. And he doesn't see the people because he's destroying all of Egypt as he's doing it. And his own people are begging him to stop. And he doesn't hear it because empires don't hear people. So we recognize it when we hear it. It's not about territory, it's not about history, it's not about culture. It's about ego, legacy, it's about the vision of an empire, and everything must serve that vision. Once we understand the frame, we quiet all the confusing layers that were going on around us. And now we can focus on our values because we understand how to frame everything we're seeing. Number one, Jews believe everyone has the right to determine their own identity. We learned that one in Egypt as well. 10th plague. The one that said, tonight you leave, paint your doorposts. Those who identify with you will paint their doorposts and will leave. Those who do not identify with you will not paint their doorposts, and they'll stay. And we're told in the Torah, we leave, and so does a whole bunch of other slaves come with us. And many of us stayed. Self-identity. Every person has the right to choose, determine, and express their identities. That's a value we hold very dear. We also believe that everyone has the right to not hide the choice they've made. And if everyone has that right, and we learned it in the ancient world, we know it's true today as well. Ukraine and every other country has the right to determine its own identities. But empires can't allow for self-identity because it can't allow for the self. It will never see the person. We also believe that every person is the image of God. It's not us collectively. Humanity is the image of God. Every single person is the image of God. And yet an empire won't see a person. And this is where our values will now start to nag at us, and it'll trouble us enormously. So now we look back at that story of the authentic whistle. The young boy who walked into the shul on Yom Kippur and had the audacity to whistle. And the authenticity of that whistle opened the gates of heaven, pierced through, and all the prayers could go in. The moment that changes. The moment you hear the person. President of the Ukraine, Zelensky, a Jewish man, has pleaded with the world for his country. He has openly said many times, he and his family are targets. A Jewish man has said to us, he's being hunted and will likely be murdered. It is the whistle that pierces and opens everything. The empire will never see the person, but we should never take our eyes off him. It is not the only voice we hear, but it is certainly a voice we can't not hear.